Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that helps you navigate through, well, just mountains of information, really. We try to pull out the critical insights, the fascinating bits, basically giving you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. And today we are plunging into a topic that I think for many people feels like a really dense fog. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's a struggle that has, shaped generations, sparked countless headlines, and it continues to echo right across the globe.
It really does. And trying to get your head around it can feel, well, overwhelming.
Totally overwhelming. You're faced with this, impenetrable wall of dates, complex politics, deeply personal stories, often really heart-wrenching ones. It's just hard to know where to even start or how to tell fact from, spin.
Exactly.
But our mission today is to try and cut through some of that complexity, not by giving easy answers because there aren't any, but by offering a powerful, maybe alternative framework for understanding it.
And we're doing that by diving deep into Rashid Khalidi's book, The 100 Years' War on Palestine, A History of Settler Colonialism and Resistance, 1917-2017. It's quite a landmark work.
It really is. And Khalidi, he's not just any historian, right? He's the Edward Said Professor of Arab Studies at Columbia, a genuinely foremost U.S. historian of the Middle East.
Absolutely. And what makes his work so crucial here is its explicit perspective. It's unflinching. This isn't just another academic text. He calls it the first general history told primarily from an explicitly Palestinian viewpoint.
Which is a voice often kind of pushed to the margins in mainstream accounts.
Precisely. And he does this by weaving together really rigorous historical methods with these intimate personal family archives, which is quite amazing. His great-great-great-uncle was actually the mayor of Jerusalem.
Wow.
Yeah, Yusuf Dia al-Din Pasha al-Khalidi. He even corresponded with Theodore Herzl. So there's this personal thread running through it all.
Okay, so let's unpack this central argument because it feels, well, revolutionary, honestly. Most of us, myself included, we kind of grew up hearing this narrative of a tragic clash between two peoples, right? Fighting over the same land, sort of symmetrical, unavoidable.
The standard framing.
But Khalidi just rips that frame apart. He basically says, no, that's not what this is. He reframes the whole thing. Not a clash, but a colonial war waged against the indigenous population.
It's a huge shift in perspective.
Huge. It fundamentally changes how you look at everything that follows. He really meticulously challenges what he calls these false received views, things people widely accept but might not be accurate.
And he uses this really unique structure, framing the history around 6 specific declarations of war on the Palestinians. Each one is a key moment where, crucially, external powers stepped in decisively.
Right, so it's not just an internal conflict.
Not at all, in his view. External intervention is key.
And that's why this deep dive matters so much for you listening right now. Understanding this alternative, historically grounded perspective gives you absolutely vital context. Context for current events, especially things happening right now.
Yeah. And just to be really clear, this isn't about us taking sides. Our goal today, as always with these complex topics, is to present Rashid Khalidi's researched arguments from his book.
Exactly. We're not endorsing a political viewpoint. We're trying to provide you, the learner, with a deeper, more comprehensive grasp of this really influential historical perspective.
It's about giving you those aha moments, seeing familiar stories through a new lens. A challenging lens maybe, but definitely an informed one.
Okay, let's get into part one, the foundation, this idea of a war, not just a conflict.
Right.
So, Khalidi's core thesis. The struggle in Palestine is fundamentally a colonial war, not just two equal national movements clashing. He says it's a colonial war waged against the indigenous population by a variety of parties to force them to relinquish their homeland to another people against their will.
That phrase, by a variety of parties, is important too. It wasn't just one actor.
Right. It directly challenges that idea of two equal sides. It introduces this power dynamic. One group, backed by outside forces, acting as a colonizer against the indigenous population.
And what's fascinating is how he unpacks Zionism itself as a settler colonial project. He argues, with a lot of evidence, that early Zionist leaders, for the first 40, 50 years, they openly saw themselves this way.
They used the language.
They absolutely did. They saw themselves as settlers, as colonialists. They understood their own process, buying land, building settlements, bringing people in as a colonial one. It wasn't some hidden thing.
Like the name, the Jewish Colonization Agency.
Exactly. That's a prime example. It was established specifically to fund and manage settlements. It was part of their public identity, their strategy, buying land, creating farming communities, facilitating immigration, all under the banner of colonization.
And this colonial mindset, it fed right into that really problematic idea of terra nullius, didn't it? The empty land trope.
Oh, completely. Khalidi shows how imperial powers consistently used a whole set of stereotypes, Orientalist images, little stories, to build this colonial discourse.
It wasn't accidental.
No, it was a deliberate strategy. Portray Palestine as empty, terra nullius, or maybe inhabited by just nameless and nebulous transients, rootless Bedouin, no fixed identity. The goal was explicit: erase their national rights and peoplehood.
A way to justify displacement.
Precisely. A
Yeah.
powerful rhetorical tool.
And you see this even in Herzl's own words, right? The founder of modern political Zionism.
Yes, Khalidi quotes Herzl's view, quite condescending, that the Jewish state would form a part of a wall of defense for Europe and Asia, an outpost of civilization against barbarism.
Wow. That language is pure colonial rationale.
It aligns perfectly with it. The idea of civilizing supposedly backward lands. Khalidi stresses that this view directly challenges those more common narratives that maybe downplay or ignore this foundational colonial aspect.
But he's also really clear this wasn't just the Zionist movement acting alone.
Absolutely not. He argues he was enabled, amplified, by powerful external forces. That's why he starts his 100 years in 1917. Not because Zionism didn't exist before it did, but because of the Balfour Declaration.
Where Britain basically commits to a Jewish state.
Right. Britain commits itself, as Khalidi puts it, to basically eliminate the Palestinians and establish in their place a Jewish state. That's the moment a great imperial power officially enters the picture. It gives the project a global backing.
So the war on Palestine, as he calls it, wasn't just waged by Zionists or later Israel.
No. He says emphatically it was a British project, and it has since become an American project. The backing shifted, but it remained crucial.
And the scale of that support. I mean, Britain in 1917 was a world power.
The greatest power on earth, as Khalidi notes. Their backing gave the project the political and military cover it needed. And today, he points to Israel's military hardware, F-35s, F-16s, Hellfire missiles, these massive 2,000-pound bombs.
Cutting-edge stuff.
Absolutely. Constantly supplied, often subsidized. And the money, the political support of the UN and elsewhere, it's overwhelmingly American. This consistent, high-level backing from global powers has been, in Khalidi's view, indispensable.
Which really highlights the profound inequality he talks about.
Yes, the unequal level of the entities. He says one has been a state for 77 years. The other group has never had independent sovereignty, statehood, or self-determination. It's not like France and Germany arguing.
Right. It's a massive power imbalance, skewed even further by that external support. So the clash of two people's idea just doesn't capture that reality.
It masks the huge disparities in power, in agency. A sovereign, advanced state versus a stateless people under occupation. It's a fundamentally different dynamic.
Okay, so that's the foundation. Settler colonialism backed by imperial power. Let's move into part two, Khalidi's unique framework, these 6 declarations of war.
Right. This structure is really key to his book. It's not just chronological. It's thematic. Each declaration highlights both the colonial nature of the war and that crucial role of external powers at these turning points.
So the first declaration, 1917 to 1939, starting with Balfour.
Exactly. November 2, 1917, the British cabinet commits Britain, the dominant empire, to a national Jewish homeland in Palestine. Khalidi calls it point blank a declaration of war by the British Empire on the indigenous population.
Not just a diplomatic statement, but an act of war.
In his framing, yes. A unilateral decision by a foreign power to promise a land it didn't even formally control yet to someone else against the will of the people living there.
And a key part of this was the erasure of the Palestinians in the language itself.
Absolutely critical. The Balfour Declaration only mentions the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. Not political rights, not national rights.
Non-Jewish communities.
Right. And the League of Nations mandate given to Britain in 1922, same thing. Never mentioned the Palestinians by name or it's the non-Jewish population. Denied national or political rights, only granted civil and religious rights. Khalidi sees this systematic erasure, denying their existence as a people with national aspirations, as a deliberate act of war.
Stripping them of collective identity and international law.
Delegitimizing their presence, their claims.
So why did Britain do it? Khalidi dismisses the simple explanations, right? Like philosemitism.
Yeah, he argues those played minor roles at best. The essential motivation, he contends, was profoundly imperial and strategic.
Like what?
Protecting Egypt's eastern border, especially the Suez Canal. Controlling the Mediterranean end of the shortest route to India, vital for the empire. They envisioned railways, pipelines, air bases. Palestine was a strategic piece on the global chessboard.
And this period saw a huge demographic shift.
Massive. In 1917, Jews were maybe 6% of the population. By the late 1930s, driven by persecution in Europe, especially Nazism, and crucially, facilitated by unlimited Jewish immigration under the British Mandate.
Because other countries like the US and UK had largely closed their doors.
Exactly. That pushed refugees towards Palestine. The Jewish population shot up to 31%, and they brought capital, skills, organization. By 1935, they controlled over half the economy, despite being under 35% of the population. A huge economic shift.
Which must have caused enormous tension.
Enormous. And this, plus the British refusal to address Palestinian demands for self-determination, led directly to the Great Arab Revolt, 1936-1939.
Which Khalidi sees as part of this first war.
Yes. It started spontaneously, a general strike reflecting deep frustration, then escalated into armed revolt when political demands were ignored.
And the British response?
Brutal. 100,000 soldiers and police the RAF used for bombing. Savage British counterinsurgency tactics. Summary executions, blowing up houses, mass detention camps.
The human cost sounds horrific.
Staggering. Khalidi estimates 14 to 17% of the adult male Arab population of Palestine was killed, wounded, imprisoned, or exiled. And crucially, during this repression, the British also armed and trained Zionist militias, like the Haganah,
laying the groundwork for a future army.
effectively creating its nucleus.
Yeah.
Foreshadowing future military methods.
Okay, so after the British laid that groundwork, we get the Second Declaration of War, 1947-1948, the Nakba.
The catastrophe. And here, Khalidi highlights the shift in imperial sponsors. The United States replacing Britain in 1947 as the imperial power.
And the U.S. pushed through the UN partition plan.
Immense pressure, yes. UN Resolution 181. It approved the establishment of a Jewish state on 56% of Arab-majority land, which Khalidi argues directly violating the Palestinians' right to national self-determination. Remember, Arabs were still a majority population, owned most of the land.
And war broke out immediately, but Khalidi makes a key point about the timing of the displacement, right?
A critical detail often missed. He notes that almost half, over 300,000, of the 750,000 Palestinians driven out during the Nakba were expelled before the British left on May 15, 1948.
Before the Arab armies formally intervened.
Exactly. This first wave included the depopulation of major Arab cities, Haifa, Jaffa, centuries of urban Palestinian culture gone. The other 400,000 were expelled later in what he calls ethnic cleansing operations after Arab armies got involved.
And their land and property.
Expropriated by the Israeli government to be used solely for the benefit of the Jewish people, cementing a new reality on the ground.
And again, this wasn't just local forces. International backing was key.
Indispensable, Khalidi argues. He points to the ample armament that the Zionist militia Israeli army received, both from the Soviet Union and from the United States. Critical military hardware. External powers were deeply involved in shaping the outcome.
Moving to the Third Declaration, 1967, the Six-Day War, often portrayed as purely defensive by Israel.
Khalidi challenges that. He argues Israel's preemptive strikes weren't solely their decision. The leadership went to Washington to get a green light, which they received, and without which they would not have gone to war.
So a joint operation with U.S. approval, in his view.
Yes, demonstrating America's ongoing crucial role. A strategic move in the Cold War context.
And then there's UN Resolution 242, usually seen as a basis for peace.
But Khalidi calls it another declaration of war on the Palestinians.
Why?
Because while it called for withdrawal from occupied territories, it made no mention of Palestine or the Palestinians or their rights. It framed it solely as a state-to-state problem.
Erasing the Palestinians as a political entity again.
Just like Balfour. And of course, this war led to another 250,000 Palestinians being displaced, expanding the occupation, deepening the crisis.
Fourth Declaration, 1982. The invasion of Lebanon, the siege of Beirut.
Again, Khalidi frames it as a joint Israeli-American operation. He says Ariel Sharon got a green light from Secretary of State Haig in Washington.
And the U.S. role went beyond approval.
Oh, yes. The U.S. supplied Israel with weapons and supported the expulsion of the PLO's leadership and combatants from Beirut to Tunis. The aim was clear. Neutralize the PLO, crush Palestinian nationalism.
And this part is very personal for Khalidi.
Deeply. He lived in Beirut for 15 years, witnessed it all. He presents what he calls damning evidence from leaked Israeli archives, suppressed parts of the Kahan Commission report.
The inquiry into Sabra and Shatila?
Right. Evidence, he argues, of the Israeli government's conscious decision to send Christian militias into the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps with the clear intention of instigating the Sabra and Shatila massacre, a huge claim about direct Israeli complicity.
Wow, okay, Fifth Declaration, 1987, 1995. This covers the First Intifada in Oslo. Seems like a period of hope initially.
The First Intifada, yes. Khalidi describes it as spontaneous, bottom-up resistance born of frustration, not directed by the PLO leadership at first. He calls it a stupendous instance of popular resistance, even the first unmitigated victory for the Palestinians in this long war.
Because it was largely nonviolent.
Largely, yes. Mass demonstrations, strikes, civil disobedience, largely successful avoidance of firearms. This had a profound positive impact on world opinion, and even convinced Israeli elites that the old ways of control weren't working.
But then came the Oslo Accords in 1993, generally seen as a peace process.
But Khalidi considers them another internationally sanctioned American-Israeli declaration of war on the Palestinians.
That's a really stark counter-narrative. Why?
He argues they did not resolve any fundamental Palestinian demands. Sovereignty, end of occupation, right of return, Jerusalem, none of it was settled. He advised the Palestinian team before Oslo, but not during the secret talks, and he basically calls it a disastrous mistake by the PLO leadership. He literally says, they were wrong, I'm right.
Strong words, and his view on the U.S. role in that.
Uncompromising. He says the U.S. is not and cannot be a mediator, a broker, or a neutral party. It has formally committed itself to endorse the Israeli government's positions. Billions in aid, UN vetoes, policy alignment. He argues this makes any fair outcome via a U.S.-led process impossible.
Right. Which brings us to the Sixth Declaration, 2000 to 2014. Second Intifada, the Gaza Wars.
Yes, a period of intense Israeli backlash and 3 major attacks on Gaza, 2008, 2012, 2014. Khalidi emphasizes the massive death toll and physical destruction, particularly in Gaza.
And he links this directly to U.S. weapons.
Directly. Lethal weapons supplied to Israel by the U.S., armed drones, Apache helicopters, F-15s, F-16s, heavy artillery. He cites an incredible statistic. 20 kilotons of high explosive were used in 2014 against the Gaza Strip, the most heavily populated area on Earth.
20 kilotons, that's huge.
Equivalent to a tactical nuke. And almost all of it, he stresses, American supplied. Underscoring again that indispensable external role, making the U.S., in his view, deeply complicit.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to part 3, Palestinian resistance and identity. If it's a colonial war, resistance is inevitable.
Khalidi makes that case very strongly. He even quotes the early Zionist leader, Jabotinsky, who basically said, of course they'll resist. Colonized people always resist. It's necessary, inevitable.
So it's a natural response.
Exactly. And Khalidi slams the framing of this resistance as just banditry or terrorism. He says that's a classic colonial tactic, an attempt to delegitimize the natural, normal resistance of colonized peoples.
The colonizer always defines the resistance in negative terms.
Always. British in India, French in Algeria. It's the standard playbook. And crucially, he adds, colonialism can only impose itself via massive violence. But the violence of the colonial power is always airbrushed out. He compared Israeli methods to British tactics in Ireland or India.
And this resistance isn't just armed struggle, right?
Far from it. That gets the headlines, but Khalidi emphasizes nonviolent popular resistance. Boycotts, strikes, petitions, mass demos. The First Intifada is his prime example. Mass-based, largely nonviolent, huge international impact.
There's also cultural resistance.
Hugely important. What Edward Said called the permission to narrate. Khalidi highlights writers like Hassan Kanafani, Mahmoud Darwish, Emil Habibi, both in exile and inside Palestine. They succeeded in reacquiring the right to tell their own story.
Taking back the narrative.
Exactly. From Israeli narratives, sometimes from Arab governments too. Their work novels, poetry, plays voice that shared national experience of loss, exile, alienation, but also insisted on the continuity of Palestinian identity and resoluteness, keeping the story alive.
And then there's the concept of sumud.
Ah, yes. Steadfastness, perseverance, or, as Khalidi puts it simply, just staying there, staying on the land.
Seems simple, but powerful.
Incredibly powerful, he argues. A form of invisible resistance. In a conflict where displacement is a key goal, just remaining, farming, rebuilding, maintaining community that becomes profound defiance. A daily refusal to be erased.
And Palestinian identity itself, Khalidi argues it's modern.
Yes, modern and contingent, not some ancient timeless thing, but forged in response to specific circumstances, the Zionist project, the British Mandate. He links the denial of that identity by Herzl, by Balfour, directly to the erasure of their national rights. If they aren't a distinct people, it's easier to deny them self-determination.
But Khalidi doesn't shy away from criticizing Palestinian leadership either.
Not at all. He's quite blunt, remorseful of the ineptness and short-sightedness of their leadership at times. He talks about ideologically bankrupt political movements, major strategic errors.
Like not understanding global power dynamics.
Exactly. He says they often were not very clear on some of the global elements of power, especially the U.S. and Europe. Unlike Zionist leaders Weizmann, Golda Meir, Abba Eban, who deeply understood Western politics and leveraged them brilliantly.
A strategic
It's
disadvantage.
a huge one. And he laments that today there's still a lack of a unified national movement and a clear consensus on strategy. He argues that unity like the Irish, Algerian, South Africans achieved is essential for success against such odds.
Okay, part 4. Shifting sands, global dynamics, and future prospects. Khalidi talks about the duplicity of Zionist intentions from the start.
Yes, he contrasts their public statements with private plans. He uses that amazing story of his great-great-great-uncle, the mayor of Jerusalem, writing to Herzl in 1899.
Warning him off.
Warning him about the folly of trying to create a Jewish nation in an already inhabited land, pleading, "In the name of God, let Palestine be left alone."
And Herzl's response.
Publicly, very reassuring, "We don't intend to drive anyone away." But Khalidi points at Herzl's private diaries from the same time, where he's talking about spiriting the population discreetly across the borders.
Wow, so the goal was always a majority Jewish state.
That's Khalidi's argument, in what was then a majority Arab country. And he says that deceptiveness has been a constant ever since. This links to the idea of politicide, the systematic effort to destroy Palestinians as a political community. He even sees it codified in things like Israel's 2018 nation-state law.
And the current reality. Ongoing settler colonialism.
Unambiguously, in Khalidi's view, actions in the West Bank displacement, demolition, settler expansion, and Gaza, the siege, the recent war. He calls it the imposition of a colonial reality, a project out of place in the 21st century, all amplified by that enormous imbalance in the U.S. putting its big fat thumb on the scale for Israel.
He gives specific examples of U.S. complicity.
Very specific. He cites the U.S. budget request from October 20th, 2023, $14 billion for Israel. And remarkably, it included a line item for support for migration, including people leaving the Gaza Strip.
Support for migration out of Gaza.
That's how Khalidi interprets it. He argues it suggests the U.S. was party to an Israeli plan to expel populations from the Gaza Strip right from the start of that conflict. He argues it shows U.S. complicity in a litany of war crimes.
He also addresses the more extreme elements within Zionism.
Yes, what he calls the Jewish fascism strain. He traces an anti-democratic and racist element from early figures like Jabotinsky through extremists like Meir Kahan, right up to elements in the current Israeli government, which he describes as Jewish supremacist with a racist colonial attitude towards the Palestinians. He argues this reality challenges Israel's claim to be both Jewish and democratic.
It sounds incredibly bleak, but he does see shifts happening.
He does, particularly in public opinion in the West. He sees an increasing sense, especially among young people, that this is not just a war. This is part of a larger project, the settler colonial one. And this isn't just in the global South anymore, but in the global North too.
Especially among younger people and Democrats in the U.S.
Yeah, he points to Gallup polls showing more Democrats are sympathetic to the Palestinians than to Israel, which he calls earth-shaking, given decades of near-unanimous Western support for Israel.
And social media is driving this.
He thinks it's a huge factor. Young people getting information directly, bypassing traditional media who completely distrust, scorn, and have absolutely no time for the mainstream corporate media. He even says, controversially perhaps, that there's often more critical thinking in the Israeli press than in the Washington Post or on CNN.
But for activists speaking out, there's a backlash.
A ferocious backlash, he warns. An absolute war on any form of Palestinian activism, often framed as fighting anti-Semitism. But Khalidi argues it's not. It's fighting Palestinian activism, an attempt to shut down an argument they can't win.
And he sees this as part of a bigger picture.
Yes, much bigger than Palestine. Part of a larger agenda to push authoritarian standards more broadly, using Palestine as a wedge issue to attack academic freedom, racial justice, gender issues.
So his advice to activists:
educate yourselves deeply, broaden the coalition, reach beyond the usual circles, and crucially, link the Palestine struggle to other similar struggles globally. Colonialism, racism, oppression. He sees the current moment, tragically, as an educable moment, noting phenomenal sales of books on Palestine.
Despite everything, does he express any hope?
He does, perhaps surprisingly. First, Palestinian resilience. He says, everything that Zionism has done since 1897 has still not succeeded in transforming the land of Palestine into the land of Israel. The Palestinians are still there.
Half the population between the river and the sea.
Exactly. Still clinging to their land, still resisting, simply by staying there.
Simud. And other reasons for hope.
A younger generation with a new spirit of resistance. The changing global order, the end of the unipolar world, the rise of China, India, Brazil, which might have a positive effect. And while elite support in the West is still strong for Israel, at the level of public opinion, there are dramatic shifts underway. Even the fierce counterattack against criticism is a sign, he thinks, that they can't win the argument anymore.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive into Khalidi's book, it's really offered a powerful alternative way to see this conflict, moving past that simple tragic clash idea to this view of settler colonialism backed by empires.
Yeah, we've gone through his 6 declarations of war, looked at Palestinian resistance in all its forms, armed, cultural, just sumud, staying put.
We also touched on his critiques of Palestinian leadership, the evidence he presents on Zionist intentions, and importantly, those threads of hope he sees, despite the grim reality Palestinian resilience, shifting global opinion.
And it's worth remembering that personal dimension for Khalidi, weaving his family's story in, getting something off his chest, as he put it.
Yeah.
It reminds you history is lived experience.
Absolutely. So the final thought for you, the listener, to take away. If Khalidi's analysis holds that this is a settler colonial project needing external support, and if global and Western public opinion is shifting so dramatically, what might that mean for a truly equitable resolution down the line?
How does understanding these deep historical power dynamics change how you engage with the news, with the narratives you hear today?
It's knowledge not just for facts, but hopefully for more thoughtful understanding and engagement.